There are keys to your future in your past. I know if I didn't look at that message, read that message, and dive into what was perceived trauma from my past, I wouldn't be here in the way I am today, and I think it was super helpful for me.
When you reflect with a higher awareness, in this case self-awareness, you learn things that you wouldn't have otherwise. And so I started to reflect of like, why does this keep happening? Why does this keep happening?
Next Level Nation, welcome back to another very special, as always, NLU Weekly Live Podcast, week number 117, Why You Should Stop Running from Your Past. Happy 4th of July to those in the United States. We are coming to you live because it's Monday.
Kev, apparently it's also Canada Day, I want to say, this weekend. I don't know what day. But this weekend, I think, is something called Canada Day. I've been told by someone in book club who is from Canada. So,
okay, well, happy whatever day it is to wherever you are in the world.
Exactly.
What do you think of that?
I think it's time.
So one of the things Alan and I talk about often is our past, which I think we might talk about it more than most people, and it might be weird. But I know, Alan, you and I have had so many different pieces of awareness rise because we've looked into our past, and I think if I wasn't on this journey and you and I weren't doing this podcast and the coaching and trying to have the impact that we're having, I don't know that I would look into my past as much as I do. I think there would be things that I probably would run from. So our goal today is to share vulnerably parts of our past, but also give you a little extra motivation or inspiration why you shouldn't run from yours. There's a lot of greatness buried in your past, and a lot of the stuff that has happened to you in the past can help you get to your next level in the future. Anything you want to add, sir?
The frame for this one, I think, is if you were ever watching a kid's movie that you saw as a kid and then you watched it again as an adult and you noticed certain things that you never picked up on as a kid, I think that that's what happens when we look and reflect on our past from a higher sense of awareness. And I think that you have the past, you have the present, and you have the future. And I think that you can reflect on the past in order to learn in the present to build toward a brighter future. And I think it's absolutely critical. John Maxwell says that people think wisdom comes with age. He says that is not true. You know, I've seen it 1,000 times. Sometimes age comes alone. He said sometimes age comes alone. Wisdom, I think, is knowledge plus experience plus reflection. And I think today we're going to talk about reflection.
I remember back in the day, I got to stop saying back in the day because it makes it seem like it was 30 years ago. Probably 5 or 6 years ago, I lived in New Hampshire, actually 10 minutes from where I live today. And I remember I was sitting on my couch and I was home for the weekend from work, I think. I did a lot of traveling. I was home on the weekends. And I remember I was watching something and I was just scrolling through my phone and I ended up in Facebook. And at the time, Facebook had this folder where if somebody wasn't friends with you and they sent you a message, it would go to this folder. And I think it's still like that today. And I remember seeing something that said, "Hey, Kev, this is blank. I'm your father's girlfriend." And I remember thinking, I don't know about this. I don't think we're going to do this at all. And I remember putting my phone down and I said, all right, let me at least look at this. And I went back into the message and I opened it up and it said, "Hey, I am blank. I'm your father's girlfriend, and he wanted me to reach out to you and let you know, number one, he is so proud of you and everything you're doing, and number two, if you were ever open to meeting, that is something that he would like to do." And I remember I threw my phone on the ground, I fell on the floor and started crying, and I remember in that moment, I think the reason I was so overwhelmed is because I had run from the fact that I didn't have a dad for my entire life, right? At this point, I'm 27 years old, and I said this recently, the reason it was very easy for me to run from that part of my past and to be very negative towards my dad, I mean, I've said many times in the past, I don't care if that man is alive, I don't care if he's dead, I don't need him. I think that was under the assumption that I would never have to see him. And when I got that message with the opportunity to meet my dad, I ended up thinking to myself, well, this is something that, number one, is going to require a lot of courage, but I do believe will really help me in my future. And I ended up meeting my dad, and I remember when I sat down, I thought to myself, we went to a diner. We met at a diner, and I got there before him. And I remember when I sat down, I was like, I don't even know what this guy looks like. Like, I don't even know what he looks like. I'm not even going to know when he gets here. And that was super weird. And then he ended up coming, and I remember watching him walk by the window, and I said, that's my dad. I don't know how I knew, but I knew that was my dad. We had a conversation, as awkward as you would expect. But after I left, I remember it felt like there was a weight that lifted off my shoulders. I don't know if it's because there was a part of me that healed. I don't know if it's because I connected dots. But the first point is there are keys to your future in your past. After I saw my dad, I realized that number one, I had created a villain from somebody that I was really letting run parts of my life. And it was me giving him a lot of power and saying, well, this person affected my life. He left. I'm this way because he left, and all of these things. When in reality, that wasn't true. The problem was so much of my emotions I just left in the past. And that was the story that I was telling myself. My dad left, therefore I am this way. So when I got the opportunity to see him and I actually saw him, so much of my future unlocked because I realized, well, I'm not broken. I wasn't abandoned. My dad didn't know better. He was a guy with his own problems, with his own level of awareness, trying to figure out his life. I think it helped me humanize something that I villainized for a long time. And I think that unlocked pieces of me for the future. So the first point we were talking about, there are keys to your future in your past. I know if I didn't look at that message, read that message, and dive into what was perceived trauma from my past, I wouldn't be here in the way I am today. And I think it was super helpful for me.
You've heard me say this many times. The gold is buried where you least want to dig. I see this time and time again with my clients and with myself as well. So there are keys to your future in your past. It's often where you don't want to dig. That being a prime example, Kev, with your dad. Obviously, that took a ton of courage, hence the crying on the floor and all of that. So it took a ton of courage. So kudos to you for that, brother. I understand. I have a client who was in radio for a long time, and she has started her own podcast, and she was struggling to be consistent. And we were trying to figure out why that is. And again, there are keys to your future in your past. What we figured out when we started to reflect on the past, and that's all coaching really is. It's okay. Let's understand the future you want. Okay. Let's reflect on your past to figure out if you're on track or off track toward that future, and what are you doing or not doing in the present, and what do we have to shift in the present in order to get to that future. And so what we did is we reflected on the past of, okay, why aren't you being consistent? Okay, well, the answer is probably buried somewhere you don't want to dig. And so I'm like, okay, what's your relationship like with your mom? What's your relationship like with your dad? What's your relationship like with your family? And we eventually get to the point where we find out that this person's mom is extremely critical of all of the content that she releases. And so every time she releases an episode, her mom calls her and says all these things. And I've been there too. I talk often about how when Emilia and I started the Conscious Couples podcast, the very first episode is called Our Love Story. And that's a very challenging, vulnerable thing to share with the world. And our families listened to it, and their feedback was not all positive. And both our families called us literally the next day after it launched. And of course, that's going to be really challenging. So if this person is afraid of the judgment of their own mother, what are the chances they're going to stay consistent? Right? So now that she identified the root cause of why she's not consistent, now we can go to work on it instead of, I'm just not consistent. See the difference? One of them is, I'm just not that consistent as a person. The other one is, I'm not consistent at this one particular thing because I'm really afraid of the overcritical nature of my mother, and that's what's holding me back. So now I can have a conversation with her, I can face my fear, and then I can say, listen, you need to stop doing that. And I have no doubt that this person's future has now unlocked now that we were able to really uncover that. And that's this first one. There are keys to your future in your past. Kevin and I are going to talk a lot about our clients, listeners, people, places, things, and ideas, ourselves. We're going to tell stories about ourselves. But remember, why you should stop running from your past. You. This is about you, the viewer, the listener. Why you should stop running from your past, but really why we all should. And just keep that in mind as you're listening. Keep that in mind. Why I need to stop running from my past.
Great point, Alan.
Thank you, brother.
You're very welcome. I look back And I have a very successful relationship now. I'm deeply in love. I'm getting married in a month, and it's all amazing and it's awesome. And I'm super, super grateful. But that wasn't always the case for me. I look back into my past of relationships, and many of them were train wrecks. Upon further review, they weren't nearly
Happily
as
ever after, Kev? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, most of them weren't back in the day, and I didn't realize that until I reflected. So I remember I had a partner, and we had like some pretty heated arguments. And I remember it was like a scene from a movie where we had an argument, and I was like, screw this, I'm leaving. Like, I'm not doing this. I am not doing this. And she said, if you leave, we're done forever. And I was like, I don't even care. I don't even care. Whatever. I don't even care. And I remember walking out to my car, opening the door, and I was like, oh no, I can't leave. I don't want this to be done forever. And then I went back inside. I tucked my tail and I went back inside. And that was like, I was pretty ashamed of that. In our relationship, it wasn't, I won't say it was toxic. Like, it wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't super aligned. It definitely wasn't ideal. And we definitely had a bunch of junk that neither of us had really dealt with. And I remember a lot of my friends at the time, I had a couple particularly who reached out to me and said, Kev, every time you get a girlfriend, you're not a good friend. Like, you just disappear. You just ghost. And I was like, come on, man, get out of here with that. That's not true. And then like when I reflected, it's like, yeah, that's probably somewhat true. I didn't realize how true that was. So that was one relationship. Fast forward to a relationship I had after that. And I remember very similar. Number one, I did not spend almost any time with my friends when I had this partner. Number two, my partner and I actually broke up while we lived together. Somehow got back together while still living together, and then ended up moving in to another place together. And yes, that sounds reckless and pretty much guaranteed to fail, but at the time, to me, that was somewhat normal. And then, I was like, yeah, this is going to be fine. Everything's going to work itself out. We're going to be totally fine. And this is the partner who ended up leaving me and going and chasing her dreams. That's exactly what she should have done. So the second point is, when you reflect with a higher awareness, you learn things you wouldn't have otherwise. When I started to reflect on that, after I had been single for a couple months, and I was like, interesting, okay, the relationship before this one was just not good. Our communication was horrible. I didn't have any friends because I was just obsessed with my relationship. Okay, interesting. All right, what's that about? Okay, let me reflect on that. My next relationship, we broke up and then decided to move in and sign a year lease with each other. Like, what did I think was going to happen? Did I think that was going to work itself out? So when I had I'll just say, a clearer vision and higher awareness, I was able to look back and realize I will never have a successful relationship until I figure out what's going on with me. And that is one of the things. I went to work on me, and I focused on learning about myself, becoming hyper-conscious. That was when the podcast was started, shortly thereafter. And I do believe that is one of the reasons I have the amazing relationship I do now. Obviously, Taryn is an amazing human being, and that's very, very helpful. But one of the reasons is I did a lot of work on myself. And as my awareness raised, a lot of things started to make sense. So that is the second point. When you reflect with a higher awareness, you learn things you wouldn't have otherwise. If I ran from that fact and said, yeah, no, I was just with people who were terrible, I had crazy partners, blah, blah, whatever it is. If I ran from that, I never would have learned that lesson. And honestly, I probably would not be in the relationship I am today.
Vulnerable story that I shared a long time ago, but it's been a minute. When I was really working hard to try to quit drinking, I remember when I made the decision I'm going to try to quit drinking. This was like 6 years ago, probably. And I remember for a solid 3 years, I was like, I would go for like 4 months and then I'd screw it up. And then I'd go for 5 months and I'd screw it up. And then I'd go for 2 months and screw it up. And then I'd go for 6 months and screw it up. And I started to notice a pattern. Again, reflect on the past from a higher sense of awareness, and you'll learn things you wouldn't have learned otherwise. I noticed a pattern. Weddings were my kryptonite. I used to say that. Weddings are my kryptonite when it comes to drinking. And I'm reflecting one time because there's this one wedding. It's in Providence. And I remember being there, and it was from a couple college friends. They were getting married. Both of them were close friends in college. And I remember it might as well have been a college reunion. I saw like everybody that I hadn't seen since college. And so, of course, I'm going to revert back into the college version of... So everyone in college, Kev, I think I've told you this, calls me Laz. So like my last name is Lazarus, so no one knows me as Alan. They all call me Laz. And so immediately I slip back. Now I'm Laz, right? At this wedding, I'm Laz is here, right? And it's like, oh no, Laz is here, right? So I'm like, I'm going to do one. I'm just going to have one, no big deal, which for me with the alcohol thing just never worked. One was not like a thing for me. One was two turned into four turned into eight. So I ended up taking, my goal for the night was to take a selfie with every person. Every one of my friends from college. And I did. I hit my goal. And I had a blast, and that's the problem. So the wedding was awesome, delicious dinner, open bar. And then we go to an after party. And then I end up staying in one of my friends' rooms, and then there's an after party. And I think I told you this, Kev, that this went so late into the evening that someone came with, I swear to you, I don't know how or why, someone came into the hotel room with a trash bag full of beers, like cold beers. We call them Beer Santa. And I don't know why Beer Santa came at like 2 a.m. But anyways, I'm having a heart-to-heart with one of my close friends out in the hallway about chasing dreams. And, you know, he's one of the smartest people I've ever met. So I'm like, what are you doing? He works at Apple. So anyways, I start to reflect on this. And the next day, that all sounds fun. And honestly, it was fun. And that's the problem. I had a blast. All my college friends reminiscing, heart-to-hearts, beautiful, beautiful. But the next day, I'm literally in a parking garage in Providence. I'm so hungover. And it's freezing cold because I think this was like an October wedding or something like that. And I couldn't find my car. My car was in this parking garage and it's empty. My car's the only one there for whatever reason. And I get into my car and I felt so sick that I literally opened the door. It's funny, but it's also painful. I open the door and I just start puking outside the car in this parking garage. And I'm driving home and I'm just feeling terrible. And that whole entire Sunday, because the wedding was on a Saturday night, that entire Sunday I stayed in bed. And Kev, at that point, you and I had been working together and we have work to do, right? I got to prepare my next week for success. I didn't fully feel like myself again until probably Monday morning. Now, I wasn't hungover all day Sunday, but I remember I had a workout scheduled with a friend of mine at 5 p.m. Or no, I'm sorry, 9 a.m. the next day. I said, nope, not coming, not going to the gym. The next day, he ended up saying, no, come to the gym. And we ended up going, I think, at 5 p.m. So I finally started feeling like myself, 5 p.m. that Sunday. Here's my point. I started noticing this pattern. That happened again at another wedding of a college friend of mine. And then it happened again. And I'm like, okay. So it turns out that I'm good at not drinking, except for at weddings. And I dug into it. Again, reflect with a higher awareness. I realized this. Oh, all of these people knew me as a past version of myself. And so I tend to revert back into that past version of myself. And then on top of that, weddings are really socially awkward in the beginning and they're open bar. And so it's very tempting. So if you have any sort of social anxiety, you know, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to go get a drink. And so for me, weddings were my kryptonite. And so I've actually now, again, learned from the past, invest into your future. I do avoid weddings a little bit. I do. I don't like going to weddings anymore because I don't want to drink. And I don't trust myself enough yet to be able to go and not drink. And so that's number two. When you reflect with a higher awareness, in this case, self-awareness, you learn things that you wouldn't have otherwise. And so I started to reflect of like, why does this keep happening? Why does this keep happening? Now I understand it at a deeper level. And now I'm over 3 years. I'm coming up on 3 years, I should say. Coming up on 3 years sober. And I haven't gone to any weddings in a long, long, long time. And I do think that's part of it. I really do.
This, my next point is going to be about alcohol. I have a couple points about alcohol. And I think one of the reasons why is oftentimes you make unintelligent decisions. And the last thing you want to do is look back on them and talk to them or talk about them in front of many, many people.
Hey, Kev, what's that like? Making bad decisions when drinking. What's that like?
Yeah, there's been some for sure. Mm-hmm. I remember, so I was a personal trainer and it depended on the day or the week or the schedule of the clients, but some days I had to be there at like 6 a.m. to open up shop. I'd have to open up and I'd have to turn on all the lights, turn on the music, make sure everything was set up. Here we go. Turn on the heat, AC, whatever we need. And I remember I worked Saturdays, even though I hated it. I absolutely hated working Saturdays. And a bunch of my friends messaged me on Friday and they said, hey, we're going out in Worcester tonight. I lived in Uxbridge, Massachusetts. Worcester was like a 25-minute ride. And they're like, come out with us tonight. And I said, no, I got work. I got work at like 6 a.m. tomorrow. I cannot come out.
The Woo is what we call it around here.
The Woo.
Yeah.
And there's some nice spots in Worcester to go out. And I said, no, I can't. I have work tomorrow. I can't. And they kept, come out. You don't even have to drink. It's not that big of a deal. And I was like, well, first of all, I can't go to a bar and not drink. I hate bars. The only reason I go to bars is to drink. I'm not going for fun. And I said, you know what? All right, whatever. I'll come out. I ended up going out. 1 vodka Red Bull leads to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, whatever. I end up getting home. I was driven home that night. I did not drive. And my alarm goes off at whatever time. And I remember I woke up, went and showered. And I was like, this is going to be fine. I'm still, I'm a little buzzed, but it's going to be fine. I'll take a shower. I fell back asleep somehow, woke up, took another shower, walked downstairs, and I was getting ready to walk out of my house. And my mom was like, where do you think you're going? I was like, I'm just headed out to work. Got to do the job. Another day, another dollar. And she's like, you're not leaving. You're drunk. And I was like, no, not me. I'm not drunk. And she was like, you showered 2 times. And I was like, interesting. Fair play. So I didn't end up going to work that day. I had to call out. And I remember I think I went in the following Monday and I had a meeting with the owners. And they're like, hey, you're like sick a lot. And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, you called out sick Saturday. And I was like, yeah, no, I definitely was sick. And they said, we think you have a problem. And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, we think you have like an alcohol problem. And I was like, I don't have an alcohol problem. I just was sick. and so it is funny, as funny as it is. The point I'm making is I never had an authentic conversation with my mom and grandmother or my coworkers or my employers about that. It's something I hid from. And the positives I may have taken out of that, of like being courageous and like maybe having a heart to heart with my mom, of saying like, hey, when I go out, I definitely drink to excess. I don't know why. I don't know what's going on. Like, I don't even know why I got up and tried to go to work. Like, I knew I was drunk. That was it was a opportunity to have a deep conversation, be courageous, much like I did when I got that message from my dad, right? If I hid from that message that my dad sent, I never would have taken the positives out of it. Same thing here. When I did that and I had those behaviors, I hid from it. I was like, I hope my mom doesn't bring this up. Like, I don't need a discussion. I don't need a discussion for my work. I don't need to do it. I've learned my lesson. But if I did have that conversation, who knows what would have happened? That could have strengthened my relationship with my employers. It could have strengthened my relationship with my friends. It could have strengthened my relationship with my family. So I would say that was definitely a missed opportunity. A lot of the points in this live are going to be very similar, because the thought is, when you reflect on your past, there's opportunities to learn. And that's kind of the through line of this, is there's a lot of awareness in your past. And if you're avoiding that, you're avoiding a lot of awareness you can take into your future. That's a brutal story.
Hi everyone, my name is Amanda. I am a dental hygienist and a mom of 2 teenagers. I was first introduced to Kevin and Alan about 3 years ago, where I listened to a live Zoom training. I was really impressed with the value that they packed into that hour-long call, and that led me to their podcast page. I've been blessed to be able to be a student of them in that way through their podcast over the last 3 years, and the growth that I've seen in them, I guess, is what inspires me to keep coming back, because they not only talk the talk, but they walk the walk, and I see the changes in them. Weekly, monthly, yearly. So that led me to book a consultation with Alan about 6 months ago. And I showed up to that call in the lowest spot that I've been at in my entire life. The empathy and compassion that he presented in that call, and how much work we still got done despite the state that I was in, was again very impressive to me, and I've been a one-on-one client ever since. Alan is someone that you want in your corner. I have grown so much over the past 6 months in my ability to make decisions, my confidence, the relationships that I have, my organization, my motivation, and I'm only just getting started. I've made so many big moves, and he is the biggest motivator and the biggest encourager, and he is a good human that genuinely wants the best in your life, your future, your love, your relationships, your wealth, and they just want to make the world a better place. And I believe that. And if you have the chance to be in the same room or on the same call or have these two in your life in any way, then you are blessed, and it is a gift. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for everything that you guys do and pour into everyone. And I'm just so excited to watch your journey keep unfolding and to be a part of that in any way that I can.
It's hard because it's interesting because
funny.
it is funny, but it's also,
yeah.
It's also, I've been listening to a lot of Brené Brown lately, and in book club, we actually have a book called Dare to Lead that won 44% of the vote in Next Level Nation. So that will be our next book. But she does a lot of work around shame and the difference between guilt and shame. So guilt is essentially, and this is her verbalization, not mine. Guilt is I did a bad thing. Shame is I'm a bad person. And those are two big different things. And that actually ties into the story that I have for this next point, which is if you hide from it, you may not take the positives out of it. Shame is the things that we hide from. The things that you're avoiding and hiding from, it's a defense mechanism. It's called a cognitive bias. You're trying to hide from the truth rather than face the truth. We would rather tell ourselves a story or avoid than face the fact that we made poor choices. But the problem is that if we get stuck in this shame we never face, we're going to keep making those poor choices. And so in book club, we were reading a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck. And it's all about having a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And the best way I've learned how to describe a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset is I can't do that versus I can't do that yet. I can't do that is permanent, meaning I'm shy and it's permanent versus I'm not outgoing yet. And so if you add that one word yet in your thinking, obviously it's like a good example, Kev, you used to use this all the time, is I can't do the splits versus I can't do the splits yet. Yeah, it's true. You can't do the splits, neither can I. But if we wanted to and we practiced for several years, at this point it probably takes several years, we could actually do that, right? So we're in book club, and the last, Kev, I read the Teddy story in book club. The Teddy story is a story that I heard from Dr. Wayne Dyer. It was a speech, and Wayne Dyer has since passed away, but he has this one speech where he opened with a story. It's an anonymous story, and you can probably look it up. It's called the Teddy story. And that's one of the things that touches my heart at the deepest level. So I open up, and I've never once been able to share this story without crying. And after I read it in book club, some of the people in book club were like, I understand why you didn't do that at Next Level Live, because I wanted to open Next Level Live speech with that story, but I cannot read that thing. Brandon's behind the scenes right now. He was there for book club, and it's just like, it took me a long time to get through it because I was just bawling my eyes out. Touches me at the deepest level. But anyways, in this fixed versus growth mindset chapter in Carol Dweck's book, it talks about parents, teachers, and coaches, which again is why I read the Teddy story. But in this book club, I asked everyone a simple question, and that's really what book club is let's study these principles and then ask ourselves these tough questions. And I asked a question. I said, were you labeled as the smart kid or the dumb kid growing up? And everyone put it in the chat in book club. And most of the people put dumb. And it's like, oh, okay. So if you were labeled as dumb growing up, then you probably didn't take a ton of chances at asking questions because maybe you didn't want to look dumb. I talk about how I got laughed at in class when I asked a dumb question, quote unquote. But I was labeled as smart, so I think I always wanted to prove that I was smart, so I always showed up and learned and all that. But anyways, if you hide from the fact that you were labeled, quote unquote, as dumb, what are the chances you're going to overcome that? And so that's one of the cool things about this situation in book club is everyone who typed that in the chat, I'll keep it anonymous, obviously. It's like now that you know that, now that you reflect on your past and stop hiding from the fact that you were labeled as dumb or thought you were dumb, maybe you weren't explicitly labeled, but you thought you were dumb. Now that you own that, now that you reflect on it, you can change it, you can shift it, you can move it. And that's the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. So again, you may not take the positives out of it if you keep hiding from it. If you keep hiding from the fact that you were labeled dumb or you labeled yourself dumb, you might not be able to shift it. Whereas if you just own it and say, okay, I believed when I was a kid that I wasn't smart. Now I'm going to go do what it takes to become smarter. And I think that that's really empowering. So that's number 3.
It's very hard to own what you hide.
Yeah,
I think
right.
that's a good frame. That's a good through line. I've talked many times about the suicidal moment I had sitting on the edge of a bed in New Jersey when I was doing my old job, but that actually wasn't the first time that I had feelings like that. I remember I lived in Boston, and I don't remember, this was probably like 2014 maybe. Yeah, probably 2014. I remember I was home from work and we lived in this really, really nice 3-story apartment in Dorchester, the really nice part of Dorchester. And I was home alone. Nobody else was there. And I remember sitting, our room was in the loft, the 3rd floor. And I remember sitting up there and nothing bad had happened. It wasn't, I don't know, I was just in like a very weird space. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't want to live life if life is like this. I felt so stuck. Everything felt gray. That's the best way to explain it. And I think I was just very depressed at the time. And I told my partner when she came home, and I said, I don't know, I was like really off today. I was having these really weird thoughts. And she said, I think you should go to therapy. And I remember thinking like, I don't want to go to therapy. That's not for me. I don't want to do therapy. And we ended up talking about it. And she said, look, I've gone to therapy many times. I've been doing it for years. It's been very helpful. And I said, all right, you know what? I'm going to go to therapy. So we live in Boston. I find a therapist in downtown Boston, which is the hardest place in the world, I'm convinced, to drive in. So my therapist is on like the main street in downtown Boston. I'm like parallel parking. You know me, Alan, I got to be early. So I tried to get there early, but I had to find a parking meter and I didn't have any quarters. So I had to download the app and like enter my license plate. It's this whole thing. I ended up finding it. Okay, we're good. So I'm walking down the street. I'm on the wrong side of the street because I don't know where the numbers are. So I have to cross the street and walk back. It's a whole thing. So I end up walking into the building and it's this old Boston style brownstone building. And I'm walking up the stairs, and it's a spiral staircase, like these creaky old steps. And I remember thinking, this is going to be the worst experience of my life. This is going to be terrible. And I'm sitting in the waiting room. There's a couple magazines. I start reading magazines because I'm just trying to kill time. And my therapist opens the door, and she says, Kevin? And I said, yeah, that's me. And I walk in. And it's this nice, really nice office. And she starts asking me questions, and we're going back and forth, and I'm talking about my story, and I'm talking about my past, and I'm crying, which I didn't want to do. And I remember when I left that day, every fear I had was kind of negated. I didn't feel the same way I did when I went there. I felt more empowered. I felt like I had a higher level of awareness. So this is what happened. When I went to therapy, I got a ton of perspective that I didn't know about myself. When you work with somebody who knows what questions to ask, you're bringing awareness to parts of your past that you don't even remember. For me, that was very empowering because it gave me perspective of, she said, well, it seems like you have a lot of anxiety going on. And I was like, oh, I didn't really know that. It seems like you might have some depression going on. I didn't really know that. Based on your reactions to these events, it seems like you might have some sort of PTSD. It's like, I didn't know that. I didn't know any of these things. For me, that perspective, number one, helped me feel empowered, but I think it also made me proud of how far I had come. And if I ran from that part of my past, if I said to my partner at the time, I'm not going to therapy makes me weak, I never would have got those perspectives. And those perspectives have been very empowering for me. And at another part of that is I've talked a lot about the importance of therapy. So I wouldn't even have that advice to give people is, look, I went, it helped me a lot. I know it's scary. I know it might make you feel weak, but it's actually something very, very strong to do. So not only would I not have the perspective, but I wouldn't have that ability to give advice either.
Our past creates valuable perspective. My favorite Steve Jobs quote of all time is, you cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards, but you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future, because that will give you the courage to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path. And I think that it's important that we try to anticipate the future based on our understanding of the past. So I don't want to say you can't connect the dots looking forwards, because I think you can a little bit. But I remember when I gave a speech at Medway High School, and it was so interesting for me because after I was finished, the person who had hired me to give the speech was actually my freshman English high school teacher, history teacher. And he was now the athletic director. So I remember I gave a speech to a group of high school athletes at Medway High School. And afterwards, I was like, that is so cool. And I was reflecting on it, and here's why it was so cool. I remember freshman year of high school, I was in the back right of the classroom at UHS, and my history teacher had a project. In order to pass his class, you had to, and I wanted to get straight A's, remember back in high school, so I had to do this. And I was red-faced, I hadn't hit puberty yet, I was 5'4", I was awkward. I still looked like a little child when other men in high school started to hit puberty and look like men. I still looked like a little boy for sure. And I was so embarrassed. And he said, you have to give a speech. You're going to have to give a speech. You're going to have to come up on the podium and you're going to have to give a speech on one part of American history. And I was like, nope, absolutely not. This is the worst thing ever. So I freaked out. I went home. I told my mom about this. And my mom said, well, let's get you help. Let's get you help. Let's do this thing. Kudos to my mom for this. I actually went to see a hypnotherapist, which now in hindsight, it seemed super woo-woo at the time, which was like, and I was very like scared to tell anyone, like I'm getting hypnotized and all that. It was just affirmations, man. It was just like, okay, what's something that you really love, that you're really good at? I'm like, oh, I love snowboarding. And, I'm a little kid, right? And she's like, okay, well, let's connect it to snowboarding. Like, imagine what it would be like to get on the podium and feel as confident as you are on a snowboard. And, they created this tape, and this is how far ago this was. I had a little, you remember those little portable tape decks? Mm-hmm. Before CD players?
Of course.
Yeah, man, that's what I had a recording of her voice, and I would listen to it before bed. Gave the speech. So cool. 10 years later, more than 10 years later, 14 years later, and I'm hired to speak by this same high school history teacher, and I crushed the speech. And it's like, now I'm a speaker, and I've given hundreds of speeches all over the world virtually, and it's just like, whoa, right? So again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. If I hadn't gone to that hypnosis or that affirmations about speaking, would I be here with you today, Kev? I don't know the answer to that, but I seriously doubt it, because I overcame my fear as a freshman in high school. And in college, during all my projects, WPI was very project-based. I was always the main speaker. I gave a speech to, I don't know if I told you this, but I gave a speech to the senators, the Massachusetts senators, and the governor of Worcester, and our governor of Massachusetts, and then I think some council in Worcester. And I was the main speaker, and I wasn't scared. And it's so weird to think back to like how scared I used to be as a freshman in high school as a speaker. And so again, our past creates valuable perspective. There's some perspective right there. And if you're not reflecting on those things, see, Kevin and I have a very unique opportunity here, because we're constantly needing to come up with and relate our experience to help share lessons on this podcast. Are you doing that in your own life? I know some people, and I'm just going to be very direct. I know some people that do not reflect on their past. They really don't. They avoid it. They don't want to look at the past, and I've been guilty of that too. And I have another story about how guilty I was of that regarding my father's passing. And it's so important. You're not going to understand yourself if you don't reflect on your experiences and start recognizing patterns. It's super, super important. So our past creates valuable perspective, but it's never going to create perspective if you don't have the courage to look at it.
We'll transition into the Q&A. We'll do a little detour, a little hot route, if you will. Hot route, because we don't have enough time for our last point. But this is what I would say. I'll just add one. If you're running from your past, you're not using your past to potentially help others. I think that's one of the through lines for us, Alan, is you and I. Yeah. And again, the necessity is completely different. And make sure that if you are sharing parts of your past, maybe it's difficult things, maybe it's past traumas, make sure you're sharing scars, not open wounds. A lot of what we're talking about are scars. I've talked so many times about my dad, about the suicidal ideations, that type of thing. But if you're running from your past, you might not be sharing that and impacting people. There's a lot of people who have probably been through what you've been through. I know there's a lot of people who grew up without dads who struggle with that. I know that. I know there's a lot of people who haven't been as confident throughout their upbringing and didn't think they could be successful. I know that. You know, a lot of people have struggled with alcohol. I know that. So one of the things for us is, excuse me, being able to share this is, number one, our job, but number two, it's what we believe is best for the impact that we want to have in the world. And if we ran from all of this, we would not be here to share it with you today. So that is what I would say is a little bonus one. If you can, you don't have to make friends with your past, but at least if you can make amends, you might find your purpose in there. You might find your mission in there. You might find the thing that you were put on this earth to do. Our mentor, Evan Carmichael, once said, your purpose comes from your deepest pain, and more often than not, your deepest pain is in your past.
Your deepest pain is in your past. I know we got to go here super fast on this. After my car accident at 26, I really reflected on my past a lot, like so much, because my father passed away in a car accident when he was 28, and I knew that could have been it. And many family members have been in really bad car accidents, and that's always been a big, scary thing for me. And I remember after that, I started calling people from my past, including ex-partners, and my very first long-term relationship, second technically, but it was a really long-term one, 4.5 years. Her name is Alyssa. And I called her and I asked questions. I said, what did you notice about me? Like, what was your perspective? And she said, one thing I noticed is you never, ever, ever talked about your dad. You just never, ever talked about your dad. And Kev, you and I remember the first TV show we ever went on, as if we've been on so many, right? We haven't. We haven't. But the first TV show we've been on, I remember that was one of the first times I ever shared publicly that about my father openly, about my past. You remember it was Joyce Strong. What was the name of it?
One was Rock Bottom Syndicate.
Rock Bottom Syndicate. And
I think that was the one. The other
the
one
Total
was the
Wellness
Totally Well
show was the next one. Yeah. And it was like an actual TV studio, and it was in a high school. And that was the first time I had really shared my entire story on camera publicly. And I talked about my father passing away in a car accident. And for the longest time, I just didn't want to talk about it because it always made the conversation, or it seemed like it always made the conversation sad, you know? And now I don't really avoid sad conversations. I think it's important. I think it's really, really important to talk about these things, really. And now that's what we do for a living. So, you know, I think our growth has just amplified so much. But if you are running from your past, you might not even know you are, because I didn't know I was.
Yeah.
And because I grew up with a stepfather for 14 years, and we didn't talk about my dad because that was a reminder of we're not, you know, my stepfather's children. And so it was just avoided. And you might be avoiding some stuff where there's really gold. There's gold buried there. You just got to dig, and just remember, when you dig, you're going to get messy. You're going to get dirt on you, and that's okay. You know, I think it's important that when you dig, you're going to have to get a little bit dirty, and it might get a little messy, but on the other side of that is gold. There's gold buried there for you, and that's it.
And you can't outrun your past. That's the last thing I'll say. Is your past it doesn't define you, but it's attached to you in some way, shape, or form, right? Like, there's parts of you in your past. There's things you've experienced that have created the person you are today. So you can't outrun them. Your past thoughts, your past feelings, like, they're there. You just got to face them at some point. Next level, nation. As you can see below, handsome Brandon, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening, you have no idea what I'm talking about, but Brandon is there, and he is handsome. Our 7th round of group coaching starts July 12th. Many of us take the summers off. We say, you know what? It's warm. I'm going to go do my thing. And we stop working on ourselves. And often we lose all of our momentum. So if you want to make sure you keep your momentum through the summer, please join us. We already are half filled up with our group coaching, but I can guarantee you will be the most fulfilled, aligned, consistent version of yourself at the end. Everything you need to know is in the show notes if you're listening to this. And I believe Brandon also put the link below. Please join us if you're interested.
If you've ever played Mario Kart, ready? You're at the end of the race. It's the last lap. And you have one of those golden mushrooms that you can just hammer that thing.
Hammer it.
Okay? That is what my coaching is designed to be, sort of. Imagine the finish line is your goals and dreams. I just want to accelerate you towards those. And it's weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. It's your choice. Everyone pays the same amount per session, and you can sign up for monthly, give it a shot. It's pay as you play. There's no long-term contract. You are not locked into anything. If you are not getting value, you can leave. That's totally okay. There's no penalty. If you miss a call, you don't get charged unless the call happens. Give it a shot. If you've been wondering, like, what's this coaching thing about? We're going to get clarity on your future. We're going to help you learn from your past, and we're going to help accelerate building toward that future that you want. And it really is, I know that's a silly, analogy, but it really is that. Each one of those sessions really should feel like a Mario Kart booster, getting closer and closer and closer to your dreams. I can't promise your dreams overnight. No one can. That's not real. But I can promise you that in my corner, you will achieve more and you will go farther. We are better together than apart.